he presents this in Power versus Force that seems to bring it all home very clearly. Let's attempt to understand all of this through an example. Imagine a bum on a street corner in a fashionable neighborhood. Can you get a picture of that? Bum, street corner, fashionable neighborhood. In a fashionable neighborhood in a big city stands an old man in tattered clothes, alone, leaning against the corner of an elegant brownstone. Look at him from the perspective of various levels of consciousness and note the differences in how he appears. From the bottom of the scale, at a level of 20, the level of shame, this bum is dirty, disgusting, and disgraceful. And that's how you view him, and you know people who do. And you may know yourself as having done that at one time. From the level of 30, which is guilt, he would be blamed for his condition. He deserves what he gets. He's probably a lazy welfare cheat. At 50, hopelessness, his plight would appear desperate, damning evidence that society can't do anything about homelessness. At 75, grief, the old man looks tragic, friendless, and forlorn. At a consciousness level of 100, fear, we might see him as threatening, a social menace. Perhaps we could call the police before he commits some crime. At 125, desire, he might represent a frustrating problem. Why doesn't somebody do something? At 150, anger, the old man might look like he could be violent. Or on the other hand, you might become furious that such conditions exist in the first place. At 175, we're still at levels that still weaken you. Pride. He could be seen as an embarrassment or as lacking the self-respect to better himself. And at 200, courage, now we're at the distinction between truth and falsehood and that which empowers rather than weakens. We're at power rather than force. At 200, we might be motivated to wonder if there's a local homeless shelter. All he needs is a job and a place to live. At 250, neutrality, the bum looks okay. Maybe even interesting. Live and let live, we might say. After all, he's not hurting anyone. At 310, willingness, we might decide to go down and see what we can do to cheer this fellow up. Or volunteer some time, perhaps, at a local mission. At 350, acceptance, the man on the corner appears intriguing. He probably has an interesting story to tell. He's where he is for reasons we may never understand. At 400, reason, he's a symptom of the current economic and social malaise, or perhaps a good subject for in-depth psychological study. Now we move to the higher levels. At the higher levels, the old man begins to look not only interesting, but friendly, then lovable. Perhaps we would then be able to see that he was, in fact, one who had transcended social limits and gone free. Maybe a joyful old guy with the wisdom of age in his face and the serenity that comes from indifference to material things. At 600, peace, the highest level any of us will ever attain here. He is revealed as one's own self in a temporary condition. Can you see the difference? Can you see the distinctions between how we look at things? A simple bum standing on a corner and all of the attendant ways that we have of processing it, some of which will weaken us individually and collectively, and some of which will empower us individually and collectively.
Most of us are sort of living what Jesus talked about when he said to be in the world, but not of the world. And so all of us here in this room know in our hearts that we are on a path that can't be stopped. And it's a very powerful force within us. And it motivates us not only to come to things like this, but to behave in new ways and to break out of old paradigms. We also know that there is something more to this life that we are here experiencing other than just being a part of the system, and we are going to have a deeper, richer experience of life. And so, knowing that there is a deeper and a richer experience of life available to us fringe dwellers who are sort of in the world, but we're not of the world, we know this is not home. This is not our home. We know it. We know that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, but that it's the other way around. That we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. We know this. And my experience with the teachers that I have had and with my own meditative practices and with my own reading is that we sign up for all of this and that there are no accidents. That God's plan works and yours doesn't, by and large. And if you want yours to work, make it the same as God's and understand that. And that when you are in nowhere, you make a decision to come here. And you pick who you're coming here with. And so if you don't like who you got, you ought to be wondering why you picked them. And when you left nowhere, and we all leave nowhere, N-O-W-H-E-R-E, and we get to now here, N-O-W-H-E-R-E, and it's all the same. It's just a question of spacing. So we go from nowhere to now here. And guess where you're headed? Back to nowhere. And you know that because you have been watching the journey, haven't you? Because whoever you are has been in a whole lot of bodies already. In fact, even how you got here from nowhere to now here is exactly the same for all of us. Like it or not, you all started out the same. You went on a picnic with your father, you came home with your mother. That's the way it gets, okay? I don't care if you're a nun, I don't care if you're the Pope, I don't care who you are. There was a picnic. And now you show up in now here, and you show up in a room. And the room is this reality that you are experiencing, and we call it daily awareness. And you show up in this house, this beautiful house, in this little room called daily awareness. And the only way you can get into the house is through your birth. And you squeeze into this room, okay? And you spend your time here, whatever time that you have signed up for. Some of us for 10 weeks, some of us for 10 years, some of us for 100 years. And it's all in divine order, even though we milk this melodrama of death to death, somehow believing that it shouldn't be happening, and isn't it awful, and and we don't even believe in it anymore. And that's the ego. The ego's greatest disappointment and embarrassment is death. All right, and it does everything that it possibly can to avoid the embarrassment of dying. It will even stick tubes in you and feed you through funny little things, all of, whatever. And God's saying, why don't you come home now? And say, well, they won't get these damn tubes out of me, and they've got this. And so we milk this and milk this and milk this and don't understand that it's in divine order. It's all in divine order. And then you leave the room at your death, and the door snaps shut. And you live your life here in this room called daily awareness. And I would like to suggest to you that all the rest of the house is something called higher awareness. And very few people know how to get out of this room of daily awareness. They don't get out of it because they are looking around and looking around for the door. And they spend their life trying to find the door out. And they're pushing and they're pushing and they're pushing. And then one day they have this stunning realization. And the realization is that the door to the other room opens inward. Inward. It doesn't open out. You can't push it out. You got to step back and let it in. You can't read about it. You can't have somebody else tell you about it. It's like the difference between knowing about God and knowing God. A lot of us know about God from what we've had handed to us through the various paradigms that we have bought into in our lives. Very few of us know God directly, have a direct knowing of the experience of saying, I now know. Like it says in A Course in Miracles, if you knew, it doesn't say if you believed, it says if you knew who walked beside you at all times on this path that you have chosen, you could never experience fear again. And when my teacher said, go out into the night, go knowing that you're not alone.
Learning to think from the end rather than about the end. People say, well, you're so productive, you get so much done, you've written so many books, you've done so many CDs, you've done all these PBS shows, you've done movies, you've done... And you know what? I basically think I screw off a lot. I don't really think I do that much at all. I mean, you can't even imagine. I mean, I take time to exercise 3.5 to 4 hours every single day of my life. Every day. My kids will tell you. I swim in the ocean every day. I do yoga for 90 minutes almost every single day of the week. I walk at minimum an hour and a half every day of power walking on top of all of the other things. It's hard for me to imagine myself not doing, because my imagination is so strong and such a part of what it is that is my life, that how it manifests isn't nearly as significant as that I keep my imagination sharp and focused. And I want to read you a little bit of Neville. It's a book, Moving from Desire to Wishes Fulfilled, by Neville. The great secret is a controlled imagination and a well-sustained attention firmly and repeatedly focused on the object to be accomplished. It cannot be emphasized too much that by creating an ideal within your mental sphere, by assuming that you are already that ideal, you identify yourself with it and thereby transform yourself into its image. Thinking from the ideal instead of thinking of the ideal. Thinking from the ideal instead of thinking of the ideal. Every state is already there as mere possibilities, as long as we think of them, but as overpoweringly real when we think from them. This was called by the ancient teachers subjection to the will of God, or resting in the Lord. And the only true test of resting in the Lord is that all who do rest are inevitably transformed into the image of that in which they rest. You become according to your resigned will, and your resigned will is your concept of yourself and all that you consent to and accept as true. You, assuming the feeling of your wish fulfilled and continuing therein, take upon yourself the results of that state. Not assuming the feeling of your wish fulfilled, you are ever free of the results. The truth that sets you free is that you can experience in imagination what you desire to experience in reality, and by maintaining this experience in imagination, your desire will and must become an actuality. Again, the truth that sets you free is that you can experience in your imagination what you desire to experience in reality. And by maintaining this experience in imagination, your desire will become an actuality. Now, all I can say to you about that is that it really works. The first part of this is the power of your imagination. The second part of what I'm speaking about here is thinking from the end. The third concept, after thinking from the end, is these words. If you're taking notes, I want you to really have them underlined. These are the words that Neville has spoken that really resonated with me. He said, you must learn to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Whatever it is that you have in your imagination, this is the only tool that you have for bringing it into reality, for hardening it from a thought to perhaps first an image, and then a condition, and then an event, and then an object. That your imagination is the only place that you can make all of this happen. If it's the weight that you want to lose, if it's the addiction that you want to overcome, if it's the relationship you'd like to fix, whatever it is you'd like to create, he gives some very specific examples of how this can work. Assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled means that in your imagination, you have created what it is, what you have imagined for yourself. You think now from that end rather than about that end. And now you assume the feeling of that wish being fulfilled. And where do you experience feelings? In your body. That's what the body is. It's the reservoir of feelings. They show up in your flushing. They show up when you get embarrassed. They show up when you get joyful. They show up when you get sad. You know, you have physical manifestations of feelings. You assume the feeling of this wish being fulfilled. So what does it feel like within you to have this thing materialize? He makes a big case for creation itself, that you have really no control over the details. And you don't get to be a part of creation, he says, because creation is already complete. What you get to decide is what aspect of creation is going to manifest or materialize or show up into your life. That's what you get to do. You don't get to go out there and make mosquitoes or create flowers and all. All of that is being done by the great invisible Tao. What you get to decide is what extent of what is already being created and is part of creation that you are participating in, what share of it is going to manifest and be a part of your life. And you do this through the assumption of a feeling of a wish fulfilled, so that you imagine what it is that you would like to have or to be or to manifest, and you imagine this for yourself, and then what you do is you feel it in your body, and you ask yourself, what does it feel like?
You almost have to think of yourself as having a cord that extends from your hip. And this cord can be plugged into one of two sockets. If you plug the cord into the socket of the material world, the physical world, at 20,000 cycles per second, you're going to get what the physical 20,000 cycles per second world has to offer. You're going to get problems, you're going to get fears, you're going to get worries, you're going to get illnesses, you're going to get accidents, you're going to get victimization. These are the things that happen when you plug into the material, slow, solid frequencies. If, on the other hand, you decide to take your plug and your cord and plug it into God, and it's really an internal metaphor that you can use at any time in your life, that I can unplug myself from here, because when I'm plugged into here in 20,000 cycles per second, I am feeling anxious, and I am worried, and my stomach is upset, and I feel sick, and I can't eat, and I want to take pills, and I want to go to the doctor, and I want somebody else to cure it for me. Those are the reactions to plugging in here. But when you plug into God, in your mind, when you just take this plug and you plug it in over here, you say, all right, God, I'm plugging into you, and I'm turning it over to you, because I don't know how to handle this, but I know you do. Because you keep the planets in alignment, and you make the flowers bloom, and you turn a seed into a flower and an embryo into a baby. And I can trust an intelligence that can make miracles like that happen. And I know you have the answer. It's not like I have to say, oh, dear God, oh, my God. You know, I know that you can create the world, and I know you can do all of those things, but if you only knew my problems, you couldn't possibly solve them. And God is up there saying, you know, you're absolutely right. You know, it's not too bad to make a universe and to turn an embryo into a baby. But with the parents you had, my hands are tied. It's just There's just not much that I can do. I'm really sorry. You have to really be willing to surrender and turn it over. And ask. And ask. And then create an intention. And then I think it's most important of all, after you turn it over, to remember that it's never between you and them when you have a conflict in your life. And I had read something from Mother Teresa called The Final Analysis. And let this ring in your hearts if you're looking for what to do to reach the highest levels of consciousness. Let this fill your hearts tonight. From Mother Teresa. People are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. What you spend years building, someone may destroy overnight. Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today, people will often forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give the world the best you have anyway. You see, in the final analysis, it's all between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. And it was never between you and anyone you're in conflict with. Whoever they are, no matter how severe the conflict, it's always between you and God. Anyway. You can applaud because that's from Mother Teresa.
Now let's take a look at what I mean by the word problem. In my heart, I feel that there is really only one problem for any of us. That is, when we allow ourselves to separate from God. But in a very real sense, we can never be separate from God. Yet, we often still believe that we have problems. The problems of disease, discord, fear, anxiety, scarcity, disappointments in others, and so on, are all in our minds. When we truly reconnect to our source, these feelings disappear. I use the word problem as if it truly exists, yet I know every time I use it that it's an illusion. So every time you hear the word, know that I perceive it as an illusion created by ourselves because we have separated ourselves from God. There's a powerful line in A Course in Miracles which reminds me of this lesson. It takes great learning to understand that all things, events, encounters, and circumstances are helpful. We can learn to view every crisis as an opportunity, which wouldn't necessarily make life easier, but would make it more satisfying. We would never be able to view anything as a negative occurrence because we'd see everything as useful. Our conditioning is so strong that we often have far greater faith in our problems than we do in our ability to no longer have them. We often display a much greater faith in the power of cancer or AIDS than we do in the power to heal them. The evil, the pain, the anguish are of our own creation, and they represent opportunities to gain greater learning. I ask you to keep an open mind as we travel this path of healing to bring peace back into your life on a permanent basis. And now let me speak to you about what I mean by the word solution. I once sat in on a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The words of a sign on the wall kept gnawing at me throughout that meeting. It read, "Your best thinking got you here." I thought how true that is and how it applies to all of the circumstances of our lives. Our best thinking is exactly where all of our so-called problems exist. If we couldn't think about them, they would not exist. What we need is a change in thinking to realize that a connection to the divine is what eradicates our problems. You cannot send problems out of your life by attacking them or understanding them in more depth. Instead, you correct the error in your thinking that produces the problem in the first place. Once you bring a correction to the problem, it no longer has any validity, and it disappears. We correct these errors with the creation of a new spiritual delivery system. This is the basic introduction to the idea of having a spiritual solution available for every single problem. Here are some specific suggestions for removing doubt from your inner inventory. Keep in mind that doubt not only inhibits your sacred quest, but can also be a destructive force in your daily existence. Make a decision that you are going to meet the invisible God within, the loving presence, so that you will know her. This means being willing to spend time in the inner silence of your being. Create the time and space for quieting and listening. Do nothing else, but do this daily. Keep in mind always that doubt is produced by your ego. Doubt is not a part of your higher spiritual self. With this awareness, you can learn to observe your doubt rather than choose to own it. Make a list of the beliefs that you still hang on to which no longer serve you. Seeing them in writing will help you identify how absurd it is to stay rooted in the beliefs of others. As you examine your beliefs, see how many start with should and shouldn't. These kinds of sentences were your earliest training and may still occupy such a large space inside you that you no longer have room for any new knowings. Keep in mind always that doubt is a mental experience. If you want a thought to disappear, you can very simply send it away in this moment, just as you can refuse to think an unpleasant thought in any moment because you are in charge of those thoughts. So can doubt be eradicated when it shows up. Say to yourself as if you are two people, the one talking and the one listening, I have this doubt because I have allowed the persuasions of others to become my own beliefs. Now, I will think for myself and know that I do not have to live with doubt.